Welcome to Burby Reads. Today we'll be reading from the Loremaster's compendium, the first sections. Part 1. The Origin of the World. In the beginning there were three. Born of the world's core, they looked upon the nascent globe and forged it as they saw fit, creating creatures and landmarks of unimaginable wonder. Vana, the eldest, created a diverse, if small, land, populating it with many different creatures and biospheres, and named it Vanavevra. Quen, the younger, chose to create a huge expanse of land, populated with vast quantities of wondrous flora and fauna. It was, in essence, the world's first paradise, and he named it Quen July. The third, the youngest, but the wisest nonetheless, chose to hold back, and not to create at all. She simply watched and observed, and though something in the back of her mind troubled her, she paid no heed to it, being content only to watch the siblings create their lands. Yet when their creations were done, the elder, Vana, looked upon Quen July and was filled with jealousy. His creation was far better, far bigger, far more organized than her own. And so she committed the first crime. She betrayed her brother and smote his land with a withering plague. Most of Quen July was turned to desert, with only the rainforests and the plains surrounding them surviving. Quen himself was consumed with grief at this betrayal, and retreated into the primordial fog from whence he had come. The third child, having seen the consequence of standing by, resolved to prevent such destruction from ever occurring again, and she banished Vana herself into the fog. Yet this action took much energy, and the third child dissolved, her ashes scattering all over the lands, aiding in fertility and partially undoing Vana's curse. These particles the denizens of Vanavevra now call magic. The remnants of the gods' innocence hang in the sky, even to this day. The twin suns contesting for dominance over the heavens, and the pale moon standing opposite and alone, watches unseeingly over the world. Countless eons later, in the year of 4695 after the fracture, the story of Vanavevra begins. Part 2. The continent of Vanavevra. The continent of Vanavevra is a rich, diverse land with thousands of years of history. To the north lies the kingdom of Ennis, the oldest surviving human kingdom. From the mountain capital of Skindus, the twin kings rule the north, with both iron fist and velvet glove. The great iron pine forests, standing since the ancient times, and home to the sturdiest wood on the continent. The Stoneclaw Mountains, ancestral home of the dwarves, but home now only to frost and wind and snow. The Shadowed Lands, remnants of an ancient war, plains split into great chasms by the fall of ancient and proud creatures. The Scorched Legion, a primordial scar caused by the banishment, now festering, spitting out ungodly creatures born of hate and vengeance. Ennis was first founded when, after the extinguishing of the great dragons, come at a devastating cost, a general known as Percival Hayne took control of Aenus, one of the myriad city-states, and conquered the entire north. However, he died young soon after, crushed by his own cult of personality and triggering a centuries-long dark age. Finally, Ennis proper was created, when the first twin kings, Arton and Adimac, united the North once again under the philosophy of the Gestalt, that the kingdom is more than the sum of its parts, that a people could come together to collectively create something more. But in the year 4694 after the fracture, the kingdom of Ennis is ruled by two kings, of the lineage of Arton and Adimac. Their names are Sanello and Arundel, of the House of Black on White, and they oversee a domain split into several duchies, each corresponding to a major area of the kingdom. Sanello had 7 children: Canis, Georgi, Polyphylax, and Fornax, Aquila, Ophiuchus, and Cassiopeia. Arundel, by comparison, has 3: Uteo, Celestia, and Atlas. It is a time of relative peace, but not for long. To the south resides the kingdom of Aethys, the younger of the 2 human kingdoms, at the base city capital of Aldevois. Trade routes flourish under the watchful eyes of the guild houses, who themselves are subject to the wills of the king himself. The Aldwood, a glade of beauty without compare, the great eastern bay upon whose shores many cities are perched, the maple forest, where it is said that in autumn the sunlight reflecting off the falling leaves look like gold falling from the sky itself, the great and vast steppe, home of ancient societies, the Shark-Tooth Peninsula, above whose rocky shores the great magical colleges, the Sevens, float imperiously. The Tempest, whose raging currents stir up the most violent frothing magical storms seen in the west. The kingdom of Aethys was first founded when the human kingdom of Ennis decided to invade the south, where the elves dwelt, in 56 unique kingdoms. Pushing down from the west and curving through the south in a crescent, they eventually pushed the elves to the eastern sword coast, where they boarded their great ships and left their ancestral land behind. But Aethys had found itself in a position where it could gain some freedom of its own. Led by the freedom fighter Shantay Thurvis, they declared their independence, leading to a months-long civil war that ceased only when the independent group, the Blue Scholars, forced a peace treaty, establishing the Blue Meridian to prevent the two from going to war. In the year 4696 after the fracture, this is ruled by a single king, Alistair Byron. He is childless, having lost his only offspring Amadeus, a man literally crafted by the gods and given to the king. And he exerts control over the southern kingdom through 6 guild houses, bureaucratic organizations that report directly to the monarch, each handling an administrative area: finance, trade, agriculture, security, diplomacy, and architecture. Aethys also enjoys the presence of the independent magical colleges, known as the Sevens, who number mostly in the southwest of the continent, on floating islands bound to each other and the ground by vast spectral chains. Only the school of conjuration, torn out and shot across Vanavevra to anchor itself next to the legion, is absent. Relations with the other major powers are for the most part good. The south is quiet, holding its breath. Betwixt the two of them, the independent state of the Blue Meridian makes its home. Centered on the Meridian Pearl, a city which prides itself on its vast, all-encompassing library. It mediates the enmity between North and South, professing to all who will listen of the importance of knowledge. The Meridian was first founded as a desperate failsafe to prevent the North and South from consuming each other in war, but it has grown into a respectable sovereign state of its own, centered on the Meridian Pearl, part city, part library. It strives to uphold the ancient values of preserving knowledge as much as it can. Uniquely among the states, the Meridian is extremely free and decentralized, even to the point of allowing other sovereign states to base their claims within its borders. Among these states are the city of Somnus, a floating citadel constructed from a meteorite, which the extra-dimensional peoples of the Khan make their way. The Meridian is ruled directly from the Pearl by the Blue Scholars, a democratic group of 300 individuals chosen from around the continent to enact the policies on trade, both within the city and without. Additionally, they employ a highly trained magical strike force, known as the Cerulean Guard, in their efforts to maintain order. For the Meridians see themselves as the watchmen of Vanavevra, the diplomats, the negotiators, and the mediators. To this end, they dislike using military force, but the power granted to their guards via their Skywind locks usually suffices. More important information on the Cerulean Guard and the Skywind locks will be found in another video. To the east there lies a beautiful island, split in two. It is separated from the continent by the Great Barrier Sea, an expanse of water revered in legend for its violence. No ship has crossed it, save for those of the elves, as they made their escape from humanity over 4,000 years ago. Setting off their great and fine vessels from the eastern Sword Coast, they braved the uncrossable sea and were rewarded by a place unsullied by the touch of any mortal race, a blank canvas for them to make a new home upon. In the northeast, unburdened by typical politicking and carrying a blazing hate for the rest of the continent, lies the Draconic Archipelago. Here the dragons make their home among the bones of their ancestors, for it was that thousands of years ago, when the myriad species of Vanavevra were only beginning to find their territory, the dragons ruled much of the world. These vast airborne serpents were the sizes of cities, and kept themselves in the air by sheer force of magic alone. But when humanity began its slow but steady upward climb towards civilization in the north, they began to encroach on this territory. There were less than a dozen city-states in the north, but they banded together to devise a weapon that would wipe the dragons off the planet. and after years of systematic extermination, they did. The dragons fled northeast, leaving their home of the plains behind. As they did, many fell, dead from blood loss, onto the ground, breaking it into pieces and creating the shattered lands. Others managed to get to the large, disparate archipelago in the northeast before falling. Their burning blood watered the grass and the stones. Their skeletons formed islands of their own, and the injustice-fueled rage and hate of an entire species was compressed into the land, upon which a small native species of lizard lived. This species' evolution over the next few thousand years was dictated almost completely by the dragon's rage, mutating and transforming them into the fearsome beasts now known as dragons. At the monumental rock of Dragon's End, spearing a dragon's skull through the eye, draconic runes describe their last fight, the sorrow and fear they felt, how it fossilized into that eternal burning anger. Atop the great atoll, the Dragon King, Falkor Aran, presides over his domain, and he and all his compatriots vow this: they would never forget the injustice of humanity. One day they would return and scorch the earth to the ground. Finally, there is a single vast land of mythical repute. The desert continent of Quenjuli is but a legend, but many believe it still exists somewhere. If only the seas were not so impassable, then perhaps we would have discovered it since. Among the kingdoms of the continent, there are several main races that must be noted. Humans are the most dominant race on Vanavevra, politically speaking. Ennis, Aethys, and the Meridian were all originally human kingdoms, and their population still remains predominantly human. Humanity is also the most numerous race on the continent, a fact that contributes greatly to their near monopoly of major political entities. Humans hailing from the vast land of Quenjuli typically have darker skin and a built-in hardy constitution, giving them resistance to poison and other disease. Elves are a race that primarily live on the eastern island duo, known as Althea, within the kingdom of the same name. After the kingdom of Ennis invaded the south, their original home, and pushed them out of the continent over 4,000 years ago, they built great longships and sailed the Great Barrier Sea, famous for being impassable, until they found their new home. Physically, they appear as humans do, save for longer, pointy ears, silkier hair, and a taller, more willowy appearance. There are several subspecies of elves to note. High elves are typically aristocrats and have a fondness for finery and a penchant for the arcane, while woodland elves are shorter, stronger, and significantly more humble, having a natural affinity for the forest and for stealthy movement. Half-elves are a special case in that they are rejected by their high-elf brethren for not being pure-blooded, while humanity never truly accepts them due to their elfin heritage. Drow, too, are discriminated against, if only for their physical resemblance to the nonetheless very different Dark Elves. These Dark Elves were corrupted by necromantic magics and banished long ago to the nightmarish mirror realm of Limbo, where they reside in the capital of Skalasgird. Dwarves are a humanoid race that is particularly short, and often stout, prizing amongst other things honor, tradition, and a solid foundation of skills and luxurious facial hair. However, very few dwarves remain in the world. Some time in their past, all dwarfs insist their race was befallen by a great calamity, and they were scattered to the four corners of the continent with little to no memory of their former glory. Physically, they are a meter tall on average and quite physically strong. Most dwarves have some form of facial hair, such as a beard and or moustache. They have a single particularly notable subspecies, the Vufurjerg, the ancient dwarves, who, upon death, leave their skills behind when they die. These skills are then accessed by their descendants. Dragons are a species of vast flying lizards that live in the Draconic archipelago in the northeast. Their kingdom, formerly named the Varum, is the one that only exists because the dead bodies of the dragons emitted magic so powerful that it influenced the development of a small lizard species into the terrifying reptiles we know today. Dragons collectively possess the memories of their ancestor species, the Drakons, and thus harbor a hatred for humanity. They also possess a hierarchy based on their color of scales. These colors typically correspond to whatever element their fundamentum procures. Red for fire, light blue for ice, and so on. Black dragons are typically the largest and most powerful, leading packs of dragons. The current Dragon King, Folker Oren, is an example of a black dragon. Finally, the Khan, a relative newcomer to the continent. From another plane, they came screaming through the atmosphere within a meteorite made of a completely foreign metal. This meteor crash landed in the west end of the Blue Meridian, and within a year the Khan had used the materials from the meteorite to construct a labyrinthine citadel suspended above the impact crater by powerful magic. Various theories have been peddled as to the Khan's origins, as relation to demons, owing to their affinity for light and pyromancy, or that they came from another world entirely. Physically, they appear somewhat humanoid, though their hair and eye color, as well as their skin tone, is either extremely light or extremely dark. That brings an end to this day's reading. Come back another day when we'll be reading more about part 3, covering various myriad cultures of the continent, some in individual videos and some together if they are short enough to fit. That has been all, and I have been Burby. Thank you and goodbye.